Yo, what up? Welcome back to another quick Flutter tutorial. I'm going to start a new small series on authentication, so signing users in with email, Google and Apple sign-in. So for this video, we're going to focus on coding the UI for the login screen, and then let's use this in the following videos to implement the various authentication sign-in methods. So I've opened up a brand new Flutter project, and just to keep everyone on the same page, in my main function, I'm running my app, which brings us to this login page. And I've got that in a separate folder called pages to keep our code nice and clean. So in this login page, it will just be a blank scaffold. So you should just have a white blank app like this. Now, the first thing to do is to prepare any images we might need. So for this login UI, we basically only need two images, which is the Apple logo and the Google logo. So we're going to use this later on for the authentication. And these images, you can honestly get them anywhere on the internet, but I'll have this in my code below so you can access these assets as well. So in your project, go to the library, and I'm just going to drag my images into this library folder. And make sure to come back to the code, and we have to tell it that we're going to import some assets. So just come to your pubspec.yaml and comment this out. And library/images, and make sure to save that file. Cool, and in our login page scaffold, let's start decorating this. So for the background color, I like to have a slightly light gray as opposed to just having a completely white background. And in the body, let's have a big column, and let's just have a bit of a plan as to what we're going to fill out. Okay, so let's just comment this. At the very top, I want a sort of logo, and then let's have some text saying welcome back. And then we want some text fields, so the username and the password text field, a text saying forgot password. We also need a sign in button, and then we want to give the user an option to continue with another alternative sign in method, say Google or Apple sign in. And at the very bottom, if they're not a member, let's give them an option to register now. Cool, so this is the overall plan, and let's just start filling this out. So for this logo, obviously that depends on your business and what your logo is. For this, I'm just going to put in any icon. Let's just put in a lock icon. Now you can see when you save it, I don't know if you can see that in that corner, but it's all scrunched in the corner, right? So let's just give it a big size. And one useful widget in Flutter is to wrap your column in a widget called Save Area. And essentially what that does is it just makes the UI avoid the notch area. So that's pretty handy. And let's just center this column. And by the way, in terms of like spacing the UI out, it's a good idea to use sized boxes, which is basically just empty space. So I'm going to use a lot of sized boxes to sort of space it out the way I want. By the way, Flutter really likes you to put these const tags. So let's just do that. Now, this is going to be our first text widget. Let's just say kind of like a greeting message. So welcome back, you've been missed. And let's just style this up. So let's make it a bit gray, and for the font size, you can see the default there is 14. Maybe I'll make it 16, just a little bigger. And let's just do another sized box, make it 25 this time. And let's start to fill out the text field. So on a very basic level, right? If I just say text field and you just save it, then you should be able to click on this little gap here and start typing in, which is good. But let's just make this look a little more modern, make it a little bit more elegant. So for the decoration, there's actually a couple borders that we have to specify. So one of them is the enabled border. And so I'm going to make the border white. But then there's actually another border called the focused border. Okay, so I'll show you what the point of each of these are. I'm going to make the focus border just gray as opposed to white. If I just save this and rerun it, you can see I've got a border now that's white. And if I click on it, then it'll become the focus border. and we'll make that border gray. So this is just a good way, kind of like a good UX pattern to help the user know that they're in this text field right now. Now, I think this text field could use a little padding to get off the sides. There we go. And personally, I'm going to actually fill in the color, and I'm going to make it gray with a shade of 200. So I kind of like this look where you've got almost white inside the fill color, but then the border itself is completely white. So I think this looks pretty nice. Sweet. Now, if we want to create another password text field, looks like we're going to have to just copy and paste this, right? Now, this is making our code very hairy and verbose. So let's just put this in a separate file. And for these, I like to make the folder called components, just to have the different UI components. And so let's call it my text field. And just paste what we created earlier here. Okay, so we can come back and go to the login page, and now we can just say my text field. And so that cleans up the code so much, right? Now, if we need to make any specific adjustments, we can just do it in the my text field.dart file. So this is a good kind of common practice that you should be doing to keep your code nice and clean. What do we need next? Now, if you think about what differs between the two text fields that we have, we're going to need to give it the controller and also the hint text, as well as the obscure text. So I'll explain these three things I'm bringing in. So starting with the controller. Controller is basically what we can use to access what the user typed in to the text field. So if you look under the text field, it always requires us to fill out a controller. And so if the user types something in there, we can use the controller to access this information. And for the hint text is what it sounds like. It's just a string, just to kind of hint to the user what should be typed in this text field. And the one last difference between the two text fields is the obscure text. Now, obscure text is a boolean, meaning it's true or false. And this is just to hide the characters when you're typing a password in, right? You don't want that password to just be displayed. So just to show you what I'm talking about, if you look at the login page, my text field is now got a red squiggle because we have to fill out those three things that we just specified, right? So let's just come up to the top, and I'm just going to create the controllers for the text. Let's call it username controller, and let's call it password controller. Okay, so we can just give these controllers to each text field. And the hint text, so what do we want the user to type in here? Let's just say username. And down here we want the password. Cool. And obscure text, remember this is a boolean, so for the username I want it to be false, but for the password I want it to be true. So if you actually start typing in the username, we can just display the characters, but in the password, it'll be obscured. So that's what that was talking about. Now, the username and the password, the hint text seems a little bit too dark for my liking. I want to make it more lighter. So you can specify this hint style. And yeah, I think a lighter gray makes it look better. Cool, so let's add another smaller sized box. And now let's just have a text widget saying forgot password. Now this, I actually want it kind of on the right side as opposed to the middle, but this column from the beginning, we set it to be centered, right? So kind of a nice trick to do is to wrap your text widget in a row, which if you save it, it'll automatically come to the beginning. Then we can set the main axis alignment to be at the end. So this is a nice little trick I like to use, and then just use some padding for the row. Cool, so that's where I want it. Now let's just get another size box, and for this one, 25. And now we're going to use a sign in button. So similar to how we created our own text field, just to make our code nice and clean, I'm going to do the same thing for the sign in button. So let's go to our components folder and let's create a button called my button. So for now, just in the middle, let's just create a text widget saying sign in, and we can now come back to the login page and just say my button. There it is. And let's decorate the shit out of this. Okay, for this I want to make it black, which means my text should be white so that we can see it. And let's just add some padding. And you guys know I hate sharp corners, so let's go to the decoration and make the border radius a little curved, maybe 8. That feels better. And let's just finalize the sign in text. I want to make it more bold, more bigger, and cool. I think that's looking pretty good. And by the way, we want this button to actually be a button, right, instead of just a container. So let's wrap it in a gesture detector. So we're going to need to create this onTap method. Now if you hover over the onTap, you can see it requires this like function. So I'm just going to copy this, whatever it wants, and require it when we need to create this button in our login page. Okay, so come back to the login page. My button now has a red squiggle because we have to fill out the onTap. Okay, so we haven't created this method obviously, so I'm just going to call it sign user in, and for now it's going to execute nothing, but we'll set it up nicely so that in the following videos we can just fill out those methods when necessary. So for this one, as I said, we're just doing the UI. Cool, so let's add another size box, and this is a part that's kind of fun. So I'm going to use a couple dividers. Now if you don't know what a divider is, it's essentially just a line. So if I show you divider and you save it, it's kind of very faint, so I don't know if you can see that right now. So you can control this thickness, so you can see that little line there, right? So this is kind of just helpful when you're creating UIs. So I'm actually going to create a row and have 2 dividers, and in the middle I'm just going to have a text widget saying continue with. Sweet, I think that's looking pretty good so far. And finally, we are going to have the buttons for the Google and the Apple sign-in. We're going to need to put it in a row since we have 2 objects side by side. And just to show you real quick, like if I use an image asset and I give it the path of where my picture is, right? That's the path here. If I save it, there it is, but it's huge. So we can actually control the height of this image. And so this is going to be a point in time where we go to our components, and let's create one more thing, and let's call it like a square tile. And again, if you think about what differs between the 2 tiles, like having an Apple button and a Google button, is the image itself, right? So I need to know the string of the image path when I create this square tile, so that then I can give it to this image.asset, right? So if I come back to my home page, square tile, and I have to give it my image path, which is the library/images/Google PNG. And for the Apple, let's just change it to Apple. Cool, and remember it was so big, right? So let's make the height smaller. Sweet, and let's align this to be in the middle of the row. And let's just space this out accordingly. Sweet, now coming back to the square tile, let's finish decorating this up. So I want to have a white border, as you can see there. And of course we're going to have to make the border radius curved. And similar to the text field, I want the field color to be gray 200, so that it's got that white border around it. And I think this is looking pretty good. Sweet, and the very last thing is just to finish off with some text widgets at the bottom. We want to say, are you not a member? Then register now. And just for the register now, I just want to separate the text widget so that we can make it blue for the register now, just to make it seem like a more clickable bit of text. Sweet, now the UI is essentially done. Now the very last thing that I always do is to go to the column, the overall column, and make the main axis alignment to be at the center. And so for our particular design on this iPhone 14, nothing really changed that much, but I like to make this align to the middle because it makes it easier when we are dealing with different screen sizes. So yep, that's just a handy trick I like to do. But that's essentially it. We have a nice modern looking UI. Yo, what up? Welcome back to the Flutter authentication tutorial. In the last one, we created the UI for this modern login screen. So in this tutorial, let's hook it up to Firebase and allow users to sign in with their email and password. Now the very first thing we need to do is to go to your Firebase console and make sure to sign in with your email so that we can now create a new project. And for this one, I'm just going to call it Auth tutorial. And let's hit continue. And let's just disable this Google Analytics just for simplicity, and let's create the project. Cool, now once that's done, we now need to add Firebase to our app. And by the way, I'm going to link this Firebase documentation below because this is essentially what I'm going to explain to you in this tutorial. I'll link it below so you can take a closer look at it. So it says here, before you begin, if you haven't already, follow the steps in the Get Started guide. So let's just open that in a new tab. And even for this, we have another prerequisite, which is to connect your app to Firebase. So we're going to need to install and initialize the Firebase SDK for Flutter. And then if you go to this one, most of this you hopefully should have already done, like you have an editor like VS Code and you've installed Flutter. And just then you should have signed in to Firebase using your Gmail. And the most important thing to do here is the Firebase CLI, so the command line tools. If you haven't already, install the Firebase CLI. And so just depending on your platform, right? So what machine are you using? Let's say I'm using a Mac, and there's 3 different ways to install it, which if you actually read this recommended for, if you're a new developer, just use this first method just to make it easy. But if you do have familiarity with Node.js, then you can use this npm as well. So just copy this and put it in your command line and make sure to install this Firebase CLI. Cool, so once you've done that, let's just close this and we've installed the Firebase CLI. Now let's just make sure everything's all good. We have to log in using the Firebase login. So let's copy this and let's go to our code now. So this is the modern login UI that we created in the last video. So I'll link that below as well. So make sure to check that out first because we're going to build on from this UI. And so in this project, in your terminal, let's put in Firebase login. So we're going to make sure we're logged into our Gmail as it says like that. And then what's the next step? Then we can copy this and looks like we have a slight warning. And I think this is a Mac only warning. So it says you can fix by adding this bit of code. Let's just put that in. And then if everything has been done correctly, we should be able to do this Flutterfire configure. And there we go. So it's going to fetch the Firebase projects. And you can see these are the projects that I have in that Gmail. So you can see the Auth tutorial is the one we just created. Which platforms should your configuration support? It says use arrow keys and space to select. And if you hit enter, I think it will just do all of them. So I just hit enter. So it'll set up the Android, the iOS, the web. This, you actually had to do it manually before. But thanks to the Flutterfire CLI, we can do this all seamlessly and it's all automated. Cool, so it wants to update the build.gradle, so just say yes. And we're good. So let's go back to our Firebase project. And remember, we had to connect our app to Firebase, right? So if I just refresh this real quick, you can see those 3 apps. So the iOS, the Android, and the web, it just got added automatically. So that's good. So now the rest of the work is going to require us to do some actual code. So let's just copy this and let's add the package Firebase core. Cool, that's done. And by the way, what we just did is if you go to your pubspec.yaml, this is where we sort out the packages, right? So that terminal command automatically added the Firebase core. It looks like it says here the Flutter Fire configure is step 2, which we have already done. So yeah, this is just going to do the same thing. So we already did this. And you can see step 3 says in your main.dart file, we're going to import these packages at the top. And so the Firebase options, it should be a auto-generated file, which helps us just to deal with which platform we're on. So if you go to your main function, we're going to add this snippet of code. So the Flutter binding and also the Firebase initialize app. And so for the options, you can see here, we can just select the current platform. Cool. And if everything has been done good, if we hit Flutter run, hopefully there's no issues. If you do have issues, then that means there's something wrong with the setting up. Okay, sweet. So now we can actually do some code. So if you go to our login page, remember these two text editing controllers? We have the username and the password text field controllers. And we also had this method which we didn't fill out, which is the sign in method, right? So if you scroll down, where's my button? This one. So if I tap on this, then we're going to execute this sign in method, which currently is blank. And so this is what this tutorial is going to focus on, filling out this method. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new page called Auth page. And so this is just going to be a stateless widget. And we're going to use this to check if the user is signed in or not. Because if the user isn't signed in, then we have to display the login page. And if they are signed in, then we're going to display a home page. So we're going to use this auth page to decipher between the two. Okay, so in the scaffold in the body, we're going to use something called a stream builder. And we're going to check for some users. And the stream that we're going to be listening to is the Firebase auth, which, whoops, I just remembered I forgot to import the Firebase auth package. So let's just do that. Flutter pub add Firebase auth. Cool. And again, just to show you what we just did, if you go to your pubspec YAML, it should have added this package automatically. Cool. So now that's done, we should be able to import that library and we can start dealing with Firebase auth. So you can see this stream is going to constantly be listening to the auth state changes. In other words, if the user is logged in or not. So then we can build something, and with the help of this snapshot, we can say, is the user logged in? Is the user not logged in? So if the snapshot has data, then we have some user. So let's return a home page. Else, let's return the login page. And this home page we obviously haven't created, so let's just do that real quick. And let's just keep this simple in the middle. Let's just say logged in. Cool. And if you come back to the main.dart file, my main function executes my app, which at the very beginning goes to the login page, but let's change this to the auth page. Okay, so we're going to fire up the auth page at the beginning, and then it's going to check by listening to the stream if the user is logged in or not. Cool. Now if you come back to our documentation, we can close this now and come to the actual main documentation we want to use for this video. So we've got everything set up. And if you just scroll down, signing in a user with an email and password is what I'm going to show you today. Cool. So if you come back to our Firebase console, let's hit authentication and get started. And if you go to the email method, just make sure to enable this and save it. Cool. And in the users, let's create a user manually. So I'm just going to call it test@gmail.com and the password can be test123. Cool. So we have our first user. Okay, so let's come back to the login page and let's finally fill out this sign user in method. So we're going to await Firebase Auth. And if you look in the method, you should be able to see a sign in with email and password. And this is going to require us to provide an email and password, which we have these controllers from before. And just to keep it nice and consistent, instead of username, let's rename this to email. And give the controller and the password to these fields. And let's see what happens. So let's fill out the email, which is test@gmail.com, and my password was test123. And if I sign in, then sweet, we're signed in. Sweet, it works. And so now when the user's logged in, then they'll see this homepage, which let's add an app bar and actually have a button so that the user can log out. Right, so let's create this sign user out method. And this one is also very easy. You just need to say Firebase Auth and sign out. Cool, now since we made that auth page, this should sort out the logging in and logging out. So let's give this a go. Cool, so if I hit the button, we just log out and come back to the login page. And so that's what this auth page.dart is doing. Just to have some more information about the user, let's create a user. And just get the current user. And let's say logged in as the user's email. And let's just display the user's email. Like that. And maybe let's make it a bit bigger so you guys can see. Cool. Alright, so the basic functionality is done. Now for the rest of the tutorial, I'm going to sort of have some good practices when it comes to like UX, the user experience. So for example, like if we're signing a user in, it's going to take a little bit of time. So let's show a loading circle. And to do that, we're going to show a little dialog. And by the way, to show a dialog, it's actually going to be easier to use a stateful widget. But I actually made this login page as a stateless widget. And I was thinking surely there's a way we could just convert a stateless widget to a stateful widget easily. And I looked it up. And there actually is. So you can hover over the stateless widget and you can hit these commands. So I'm using VS Code and on a Mac, so it looks like it's command dot. And we can convert to stateful widget. Oh, sick. Sweet, so now that we can show a dialog, we can have the context and we can show this loading circle finally. So in the center, let's just return a circular progress indicator. And let's see how this looks. Hey, there it is, but it's not going away. So at the very bottom, let's just pop the circle. And let's try it again. Cool, so you have the loading circle, and then once you've signed in, let's pop the circle. Okay, looking good. Now, some other errors to take care of is, what if the username is wrong? Like they enter a wrong email. Then looks like we're just stuck on this loading circle, right? So with this sign in method, I'm just going to copy this and we're going to try signing in. And if there's an error, let's catch the error. And let's just see what the error is. So if the error code is user not found, then for now, let's just print it to our console just to see what's going on. And if it's wrong password, then let's also print that to our console. Okay, so I'm just going to show you in my terminal console right here. Let's put in a wrong email. And we can see what the error is. No user found for that email. And similarly, if we have a wrong password, so we got the email correct, but the wrong password, then we can see that error. So let's display this information to the user so that they know what the problem is. Okay, and just to keep the code clean, I'm just going to separate out these methods. So if it's a wrong email, let's just show a small alert dialog. And same thing for the password. And it looks like our loading circle is still persisting, and that's because once we signed in, we should pop it and get rid of it at the end. And if we do have an error, then let's pop the circle and then display the appropriate error. Sweet, so you can see that little alert dialog to display the error, and the user can just click anywhere to exit out of it. Sweet, so again, just coming back to the documentation, you can see this is the code that we actually implemented. So this is how you sign a user in with an email address and password. Yo, what up? Welcome back to the Flutter authentication tutorial. In the last one, we coded this login screen and can now sign users in. Now the next step is to click on this register now button and be able to create a new account for the user. Cool, so just to keep everyone on the same page, in the last video we created this login page and filled out this sign user in method. So now we can input an email and just sign in. Now just before we sort out the register page, let's just do a little cleanup on some code. And what I mean is, if you look at the software keyboard, if I just toggle this, then on your phone you'll have this bit of an overflow problem. So to sort this out, if you go to your scaffold, just wrap your column with a widget called a single child scroll view. And so that should just sort out that little error with the overflow. And the other thing I wanted to clean up is this wrong email message pop-up. So if the user gets the email or the password wrong, we created these two separate methods, but I think we could probably combine this to be just one method. So I just want to delete the second one, and let's just say, kind of more generically, this is just a error message to the user. So I'm just going to rename this method called show error message, and let's require a string as the parameter. Okay, so what did we just do? Well, if we try to sign in and we get some exception, then we could check what the error is first before displaying the image. But just to make it simple, I'm just going to say show error message and just put the error code in there. Cool, so that just makes our code nice and simple. And now it's time for the register page. Cool, so I want to make that blue register now text to be clickable. So let's scroll down and find this text widget, and let's wrap it with a gesture detector. And so we're going to need to create this function at the top. And require the constructors. Cool, now if you come back to the auth page, right now we're just checking if the user is logged in or not. And if the user is logged in, then we'll just return the home page. But if the user is not logged in, then right now we're just displaying the login page. But for this, I'm going to create one more page called login or register. Let's have a boolean to show the login page at the very beginning. And also let's create a method so that we can toggle between the login and the register page. So to do that, if this method gets triggered, then let's just do a quick set state and make the show login page just the opposite of what it was. Cool, so when we build this, if the show login page is true, then return the login page. Otherwise, just show the register page. Cool, and you can see there's a red squiggle under the login page because remember we have to specify this on tap method. So if we tap, then let's just do the toggle pages. And the register page we are about to create now. And for this is going to be very similar to the login page. So I'm just going to copy the entire login page, Control A or Command A, and let's just copy this into the register page. And so I'm just going to change login page to say register page. Cool, and for the most part it'll be the same, but let's just change this up and say sign user up as opposed to sign user in. And the other big thing I want in here is I want one more text field for the confirm password. And at the very bottom, we should now say something like already have an account, then log in now. Cool, so if I come back to this login or register page, we have an on tap to fill out. And this should work, so let's give this a go. So right now I'm on the login page, and if I hit the register at the bottom, then we go to this new page. Cool, now it looks like we're gonna have to sort out some of this UI because it's getting pushed to the bottom. So just a quick fix is to just reduce the sizes of the stuff at the top. Cool, and now we can just toggle between the two pages. And I actually also realized for the register page, we should change up this message. Say like, let's create an account for you. Cool, and one last thing is the sign in button. We should say sign up. But if you go to the button, so remember how we created this button? Let's go to that component. So right now it looks like we just say sign in as a fixed string. So I'm just going to create another variable just called text. When you create this button, let's fill out the text. So sign in for the first one, and in the register, I want to say sign up. Cool, there we go. Sweet, so in terms of the UI, everything's looking pretty good. Now for the actual snippet of code to create the user, if you go to your method, we did a sign in with email and password. So just start typing create user with email and password. And this method will create a new user. Now I want to do just one quick check to see if the confirm password and the password is the same. So the password controller should be the same as the confirm password controller, which looks like I forgot to create. So let's just create that real quick. And we should give this controller to the text field at the bottom. Cool, so if the password controller and the confirm password controller are not the same, then let's show the error message. Cool, and let's just scroll down and make sure that we give the right controller. And let's just do a quick check now. So I'm just going to say mitch@gmail.com and just give some password. And sweet, we're logged in with this new email. Now, if I go to my console, you should be able to see that the new user is created. So that test@gmail.com, that one we just created manually right from this console. And in this video, we can now create a new user directly from our app. Now, one last thing I just realized is on a register page, you're not going to need this forgot password. Where are you? Yep, this guy we can just get rid of. Cool, much better. So that's essentially it for this video. We can now create a new user, and with that account, we can now log in to our app. So the next thing I want to work on in the next video is Google sign in. So hopefully that goes well. Is where we can now log in and also register a new account. Now it's time for us to implement the Google sign in. So just to keep everyone on the same page, in the last couple of videos we made it so that we can now log in users and also register a new user. So now we need to do the Google sign in. Now for this one, we need to look at this package, which I'll definitely link below. So the Google sign in. Now just copy this and let's come back to our code. Go to your pub spec YAML and let's add this package in. So save it And let's close the file once that's done. Now just going back to the Google sign-in package, there's a lot of instructions here for the integration between Android and iOS, but some of this is a little bit outdated, so I'll show you what you need to do. Now, the very first thing we have to do is to register our Firebase app, which we actually already have done in the last tutorial. So if you go to your console, we can now go to the authentication, and if you go to the sign-in method, we enabled the email. So now let's add a new provider and enable the Google. And for the public-facing project name, you can just call it whatever you want. I'll call it Flutter Google Auth tutorial, or just shoot. And just select a project support email, so just your own email. And it says here to set up Google sign-in for Android apps, you need to add this SHA-1 fingerprint. So I'll show you how to do this a bit later on. Now, just coming back to the Google sign-in package, if you read these instructions for the integration, just starting with the iOS one, like I said, a lot of this, like steps 2 to 6 is already done for us. We already did that. And we just need to do this step 7. So copy this, and then you can see where we need to paste it in the iOS, runner, and the info.plist file. So let's go to iOS, runner, info plist, and just add it here. And then if you look carefully, you can see here it says copied from the Google service info.plist. So we have to give it the correct ID. So just go to this file that's just right above it, and you can see, so get this little number here after the Google user content.apps, and just replace that one. Cool, so this is a very important step. So save it and let's close this. So coming back to our code, let's go to the library and let's create a new folder called services. And in this folder, let's create a new file called Auth service. And let's put all the Google sign-in in this file. So in this class Auth service, the method, let's call it sign in with Google. And just to have a bit of an outline on what we're trying to implement here, the first thing is to begin the interactive sign process. So bringing up that page to click your email. And then we have to obtain auth details from the request, and then create a new credential for the user. And finally, we can use the credential to sign in. So I'll explain what each of these steps are requiring. So at the beginning, the sign in process, let's get the Google sign in account and let's just call it G user. And let's try to sign in. So this should open up a page that allows you to select an email, or you can input your own email. And then let's try to authenticate. Google sign-in authentication, I'm just going to call this gauth, and let's wait for if the authentication request has been all good. And then once that's done, let's create a credential. So if you look in this credential, we have to specify two things: the access token and the ID token. So let's give it that. And then finally, once we have the credential, we just need to use the Firebase method to just sign in. Cool, so in terms of the code, that's actually really it for signing in with Google. Now, if you come back to the login page, we want this button of the Google to be clickable, right? Now, if you scroll down, it's this square tile that we created earlier. Now, we could just wrap this in a gesture detector right here. But since we have the Google as well as the Apple to do, let's go to our square tile component and let's add the gesture detector here. So on the onTap, let's create an onTap method and require the constructor. So what we just did is we should have some red squiggles because we have to specify the onTap method. So if I tap on this Google square, then let's go to our auth service class that we just created. And the method is the sign in with Google. So we're going to need to remove this const tag now. And same thing for the Apple one. This one we'll do in the next video. So I'm just going to execute nothing. And I want the user to be able to see these Google and Apple sign in on both the login page and the register page. So let's just do it for the register page as well. Try to run this on my iPhone simulator and we should get some error. Yep, this thing. So it says the CocoaPods, it's out of date. So to update it, just run pod repo update. And then if you copy this and try to run it, again, we still have some issues. And so I did a bit of Google search to see how to sort this issue. And I can link the Stack Overflow post below if you like. But I can show you what to do. If you just scroll down, just do exactly what I do. So it says here, go to the iOS folder in your project. And we're going to delete this podfile.lock. So in the iOS folder, let's just delete this guy. And then let's run this pod repo remove trunk command. And then from here, this one becomes sort of machine dependent. So for Intel chip users, you can just do that. But I'm actually using an M1 Mac. So I'm going to follow these instructions here. I'm going to copy this and then just put your password in. And then we can run this repo update. And as it says here, we should do this in the iOS folder. So let's change the directory to iOS. And in this folder, just run that command. And hopefully we see some green. Sick. So that's looking pretty good. And the rest of this, don't worry about. Now let's hit Flutter run finally. Let's just make sure everything is working smoothly. Cool, so I'm going to hit Google and sweet, we get this little window and it opens it up and there's my email. I'm just going to click it and we're signed in. So that's how easy it is to implement Google sign in. Cool, so it's working on iPhone. So we just need to do one little thing for Android, which is if you go to the project settings and you scroll down for the Android app, you can see this SHA certificate fingerprints. So if you click on this question mark, you can see this page and we just have to do a little something. So for the debug certificate, so I'm on Mac, I'm gonna use this one. So make sure if you're on Windows, do the Windows. But just copy this and put it in your terminal. And it wants a key store password. So if you go back, the default password is just Android, all lowercase. So just type in Android. And then you can see the certificate fingerprints. So the SHA-1 and the SHA-256. So let's copy this and let's go back to the console and let's add the fingerprint. Do the same thing for the SHA-256. Cool, and that should be done. So it should work on Android as well. Cool, and that's essentially it. So for the authentication, we can now sign in using Google. And in the next video, let's try to focus on the Apple sign-in. And that should be all of the authentication for us to do. So I'll make sure to link the code below so you guys can take a closer look at it, play around with it, and let me know if you have any issues. I'll come around and try to help you out. But other than that, thanks for watching and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace!